Let's talk about it. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. There are people who choose comfort, and then there are people who choose truth. People who walk straight into the rooms everyone else is running from. Rooms filled with grief, with silence, with the questions we're all too afraid to ask out loud. My guest today is one of those people. Paul Simard is a Montreal-based speaker, a writer, a men's guide, and a cultural architect, and yes, a certified death doula. But those titles don't even begin to capture who this man is, because Paul isn't just building organizations. He's building permission. Permission for men to break down. Permission for families to slow down when someone they love is dying. Permission for all of us to stop pretending that grief is something you power through and start treating it as something you move through together. He's the founder of Humanity, creating safe spaces for men to be vulnerable in a world that told them vulnerability was weakness. He founded The Canoe, holding families and individuals through some of the most sacred and terrifying moments of their lives: death, grief, and yes, the long walk after loss. He's worked with the UN Refugee Agency. He's stood on the TEDx stage. He's petitioned for justice in his community. He's raised 3 daughters, and through all of it, his compass has never wavered. He believes that we all change the world. The only question is whether we do it on purpose. Please welcome to the show a man who lives right at the edge so the rest of us can find our way back to the center. Paul Simard. How you doing today, Paul?
Wow. I mean, after an intro like that, who's not doing great, right? Like that's the stuff of, wow, humility.
That's
deep
the stuff
humility.
of legends right there, and that's who you are, brother.
Well, for me, it's a reckoning with myself, and it's a reminder of what I have committed myself to come from. So thank you for putting that before us as we start our conversation today.
Yeah, as I like to say, we start this journey together, right? The journey of Paul's life and what he's done, right? We're going to get into a lot of topics here, right? This may run a little long, but as I say, this is my platform, but this is Paul's journey, right? So Paul, take us back to the beginning, right? Who was the young Paul? And was there a moment of pain, a turning point that set you on this path?
Yeah, it's a great question. And who is Paul as a young person? I was trying to find my place. Really, that's what I realized. I spent most of my young and middle adult life doing, is trying to find my place. I was a small kid growing up, who loved sports and who was watching his friends sort of like fill out and move on into, double letter, triple letter, sports categories. And I was too small to be able to make some of those jumps. And, in high school and grade 11, even, like today I'm 5'10", so I'm more than average, which is great. But when I was graduating here in grade 11, which is when we graduate in Canada from high school, at least in Quebec, one of my friends did a caricature of our grad class, and there was this little guy in the front who was up to people's shoulders, and that was me. And what that led to was me actually taking that on as my personality. And so the small physique became the small person. And so I really did spend a lot of my time trying to fill space, take space, and figure out who I am as I was doing it.
Yeah.
And, I think as a lot of young boys at that time, and even today to a large degree, we have these larger than life role models that are, coming at us on Instagram today and all these other social media feeds. But where are the men in our lives? Where are the men that are holding us accountable or showing us what it's like to be in a day-to-day way of living? And I've got a great father and I had some good men in my life, but to say that there was a role model that I could hold up in the same way as what I was seeing on TV or in the sports arenas, like that wasn't there. And so, the journey was always about exactly that, trying to find myself, to trying to create a sense of belonging. And I was doing it through the metrics that I learned, right? Which was professional success, relationship success, the gathering of materials and objects and, all of those things, and trying to lead a certain lifestyle. And at the end of the day, it wasn't me. It wasn't coming from me. I didn't own any of those things. And so with this mentality of small, it also led me to self-sabotage, because that's what was supposed to happen. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not big enough. And so I talk about it in my first TED Talk, which was basically me trying to be a successful entrepreneur, but not knowing really what that was. and not really understanding what was necessary. Then me even trying to become a meditator. And after 6 months, not being able to drop into deep state of meditation like a monk. And so I figured I was failing at that too, and so on and so on. Right.
Yeah.
And I'd say there was, as with, this is what I think is important for people to hear here. There's nothing actually special about my life. My life is the same as so many other people. And so throughout my life, there have been these micro crises, if you will. But like anything else that chips away at you, eventually the foundation starts to take a hit, right? And it was when I lost my job in 2017 that I took the biggest hit, or that straw that broke the camel's back. I lost my job, a job that I wasn't really enjoying, but I was being successful at, nonetheless, but was pushing back a little too hard against the systems as a sign of self-sabotage, right? A signal of self-sabotage. I own that today. I blamed my boss at the time for a long time. And there was some parts of that were out of alignment. And for the most part, I own what happened. And so what did I do at that moment? Well, I lost my job and I was in a household where I was the sole income earner with 3 girls and a mortgage and the cars and the things. And so I went home that night wondering, what am I now at home? Because I'm no longer the protector and I'm no longer the provider, because that function has been removed from me.
Yeah.
And brought in so much shame, in fact, that I didn't tell anyone for 3 weeks what had happened. So I went to work for 3 weeks, packed a bag, laptop, and I went to coffee shops, or I went to libraries and bookstores, and I was trying to figure it out. And during that time, I was Googling things like, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a husband? What does it mean to be a father? And it was what does it mean to be a man that led me to men's work, and that led me to the kick in the ass that I needed in order for me to start to recognize what was going to be necessary for me to reclaim my life for the first time in 2017, 46 years old. So that was the crisis point that led me into men's work. And, I was a coach growing up. I coached both boys and men's soccer and women's soccer, and I found that being woken up in me again as I was working with these men. And so that's when I started to move into this men's work, and then eventually also incorporating the grief and the death and the dying, because our relationship to death affects us in so many ways.
So many ways.
And so,
especially when you're dealing with it, so much, right? And I lost my dad, my mom. My dad, I was 20, my mom, but it was, grandfather first, dad, grandmom, my sister, my mom, my aunt, so many. And for me, Paul, one of the things I talk about often, right, and my listen is they're going to say, oh, he's saying it again, right? The story was my dad died, and my dad and I had this plan to being down in Congress together working. My dad did union work as well. I did. And we had always planned to go together, and my father passes. And 5 years, fast forward 5 years later, I had went to work right after my dad died and sort of buried it that my father died. And I was under the illusion that dad was coming home, right? Dad's coming back. And not really gone. He's just on a vacation almost, right? It's the belief, you tell yourself, hey, he's coming back. Hey, he's not gone. He's not gone, right? You still call his phone. You're thinking he's going to answer. And I get to Congress, right? My first time ever. And I remember walking in and I was so proud, and I was thinking of my dad, and I felt this uneasiness in my stomach. I walk into the bathroom and I remember breakdown crying, right? Just broke down. And I remember at that moment, that was the exact moment that I knew my father was gone and wasn't coming back. And it was the Capitol and being there. And, a couple of years later, fast forward, my younger brother and I were walking the halls together and doing the work, and it was almost like full circle. Dad wasn't there, but my little brother was, right? And it was powerful at that moment, right? But it's also one of those of, I find now that and it's tough to say what I'm going to say, but this is what I believe with death, right? You accept it. You may never get over it, right? The loss of somebody, but you accept it, right? But you also, if it's your dad that passed, or your mom that passed, or grandmother that passed, right? They instill in you these values, right? That you still carry on and carry forward with you. So they're still with you. They're still with you. They're right
Absolutely.
with you, right?
Well, and I'll just say one thing about the whole death thing. And I always say when it comes to grieving, actually, if you're lucky, you're going to get to grieve the rest of your life. Right? Because as long as as long as you still love that person, then you are grieving them. Whether or not it is showing up in the ways that society would call it grief, as long as you love them, you're grieving them, because grief is not sadness. That's one of the big, and I always say, like grief's got a terrible marketing company working for it, like terrible, because we've flattened grief into sadness, right? We've hardened it into anger and we've like shut it down and made it silence, right? But grief is so much more than that. Like grief, in my way of viewing it and working with people on it, grief is actually you trying to figure out how to love that person still without a body.
Yeah.
Right?
Without the physical.
That's really what we're trying to do. The physical body has died. And now why grief feels so heavy and so hard is because the love wants to be sustained and we don't have the skills. So that's what we're trying to figure out. And it's hard, right? So you're grieving for all of those beautiful people that you've mentioned. I hope it lasts for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
Because that means the love is sustained. And who doesn't want to carry those kinds of loves? Because
With
those
you.
are the,
Yeah.
exactly, right? That's the real inheritance that we're gifted with when someone dies.
Yeah.
Is that love, right?
Yeah.
So the grief is an inheritance. It's a gift.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
Yeah. And I look at it differently now, right? Because I just finally had some clarity in my life when I was, probably 10 months back, right? Of now living, right? In the present moment, right? Not worrying about yesterday. Not worrying about tomorrow, right? But I do say this to people and they laugh. My bills still get paid. So it's not like I'm just like, hey, don't worry about the bills. Bills are always going to be there. They're going to get paid. But I make sure, right? And I say it. I still, sometimes, some days I wake up, I say a prayer. But I always think of, sometimes in situations I'll smile and laugh and people are like, what are you smiling and laughing at? And I'll remember like a story or a lesson my dad taught me or my grandmother taught me, right? Or my mom taught me. And I smile and say, hey, thank God that and I say, thank God I had the best parents, right? Not just the best parents, but I had the best support system, right? I had grandma and grandpa, aunts and uncles, right? That are still with me. And those that have gone, right? I do feel sad, but I do know that as long as I'm living my life as a man in the way I'm supposed to and continuing with those values and doing the right thing, they're still here with me because they're living through me, right? They're living through me still, of teaching the lessons and being a great man, right? Because that's what they taught me and how they raised me and making sure that, you treat people kindly with empathy, right? With love. And not everyone is, you got to realize people in life, you never know what someone next to you is going through. Everyone's going through something, right? So we need to stop judging as a society. We need to stop, putting people down. I had this a lady on Event Murray who said, people need to stop telling people walk in my shoes, right? Start saying walk alongside me. Walk alongside me in this journey, right? There's 8 billion of us on this planet. We should all be walking alongside us, enjoying life and trying to our best, right? To get through the days because some days are better than others, but we're alive. We're breathing, right? Every morning I get up, I say to people ask me, hey, how you doing today? Hey, I'm alive and breathing. It's great. Today's another great day. I got to wake up and I'm good to go.
Yeah.
That mindset shift, right, to positive has been so powerful because I used to wake up and say, it is what it is. Another day. Here we go. Another day, right? So it's powerful. Paul, you wear so many hats, right? Death doula, men's guide, speaker, founder. But underneath all of those roles, how do you describe who you are?
I actually just had somebody who I was in a text exchange with somebody and the similar question came up. And I think more than anything else, what I am is someone who is deeply curious. I think the whole experience that we're being invited into here is fascinating. And I'm constantly drawn to these moments of wonder of just what it is exactly that we're being called into, right? And so I'm very, very curious. I am someone who takes deep pride in the life that I am being given. You mentioned the 3 daughters and, their reason for me to show up as what, you talked about. What does it mean to be a good man for you? And I've got what that means for me. And more than anything else, what I want to do is embody for my girls something that might look like the man that they would want to be with for themselves, right? So that they have markers and they have things that they can look to and look for. And that includes the things that don't resonate with them, right? But if I stay true and if I stay authentic and if I stay in alignment with those things, then that's always a teacher. I'm someone who also, I was raised in service, right? My mom and my dad, in their own ways, were always in service to community. And so for me, that's my definition of sovereignty, actually, is I have an awareness of who I am and what I can offer people. And with that awareness, I'm able to bring into the community service, right? Because the first sovereigns were in service. They were who you went to when you needed support in your village or whatever. The leader of the village, the king of the whatever, they were the ones who people turned to. They weren't rulers held on high. That wasn't what the first sovereigns were, So I want to be sovereign in that way. Someone who is ready to serve.
And that's the big thing, right? And same here, right? Growing up in the Catholic Church, right? It was always, living in the, service of others, right?
Yeah.
And that's the big thing I think we've gone away from, as a society is, looking out for your neighbor, right? Looking out for the family across the street, right? I remember as a kid, mom and dad would be like, hey, go next door and grab a stick of butter, right, from the neighbor. Go next door and grab a cup of sugar, right? Those days are gone, right? Neighbors now will tell you to go shit in the hat.
Neighbors don't even look at each other. Not look out for each other. They don't even look at each other. We've got these fences. People are living in apartments, and one of my friends, she always points out, think of that name. They're called apartments. They're literally, the name keeps us apart. And we've got fences and people, we've developed a world where literally you never have to leave your home anymore. You quite literally don't have to leave your home.
Well, I think about it, Paul, right? As a kid, I remember growing up and weekends would come and it would be 8:00 in the morning and you would run out the door, right? And you would make sure that, I remember leaving the house. It was so funny as a kid, right? Hockey stick in one hand, baseball bat in the other, glove, mitts. And you'd go, right? You'd go to the local park and see if anyone's playing tennis ball or baseball. You go to the local park, who's playing hockey, right? There was always a game, right? Ball, hockey. There's always a game everywhere. Nowadays, you don't see any of that. Kids are non-existent anymore, and it's tough because I think as a kid, that's one of the biggest things. Now, kids, like you said, people are so just centered in their ways and stuck in their homes, right? Kids now rather sit on the Xbox or the PlayStation for 10 hours a day and isolate themselves and play. That's not living your life, right? But that's also one of the biggest things of getting out, right? With your group of friends, having fun, breath of fresh air. The internet today, forget about it, right? I could only imagine, I remember I tell the story often of when I was a kid, you had to dial up online, right? You had to get the AOL and you dial up and you'd have to tell everyone in the family, don't use the phone. I'm on the internet, right? Nowadays, it's just you got one here, you got one there, it's everywhere. And I think one of my biggest messages to people is to shut down the phones, shut down the internet, shut down the Xboxes and get the hell outside, Enjoy your neighbor,
Well, to talk about grief for a minute, I mean, there's, our kids are growing up today grieving something that they never knew.
Yeah.
There's a Welsh word, a beautiful Welsh word, higayeth. And higayeth is like a homesickness, a nostalgia, and a longing for something.
Yeah.
And in English, that makes sense. And so far we're following, right? But the higayeth holds another energy, which is also this longing for something that you've never known, but you can feel is like missing from your experience, right?
Yeah.
And these young people today, they're waking up and they're moving through the world, never really knowing what it means in a lot of cases, to get lost in the woods, to use a something that I know I did all the time, was just go out into the woods near the house and stuff and you're not lost really, right? But they don't do that anymore. Or, just to go out and to actually be in connection with people. Like you said, for me, it was always where are the bikes, right? So you just rode around and when you saw all the stacks of bikes, you knew that's where the kids were.
Where everybody was.
Somebody's house, at the park, at the pool, wherever it was, wherever the bikes were, right? Kids don't get, they don't even have bikes. They have these like hoverboard things now that they move around on, right? So, and look, there's no judgment there. That is the world, but we have to also recognize that there's a cost to these decisions. And it may not be our fault that that's the world that is sort of being presented to us, but it is our responsibility to determine whether or not we're going to do something about it, right? And so as parents, as teachers, as leaders in the community, as leaders in government, you talked about politics. I can't understand, I'm in Canada, right? So we can't post news articles on social media here. Okay. They're blocked. So if I post something from the New York Times or from the Globe and Mail, it's blocked. And that was a government imposed thing. Crazy, but
Sounds like
whatever.
government overreach to me.
It may well be. And if they can do that, then there is no reason why they can't also impose on Facebook and Snapchat and TikTok the same technology that Airbnb or Wise uses, which is to say, you need government ID to get on here, kid. So you're not 16 years old, and here we have what we call the Medicare card. 12-year-old kid shows his Medicare. He's going to get access to what a 12-year-old has access to on Snapchat. They're not going to get shaped and influenced by. So these things are there. They're accessible. And that's actually one of the ways where you said government overreach. And I'm no patience for government overreach. And when there is something as uncontrollable as social media and the internet, the government should be doing what it can to protect young people in particular.
Young people,
right?
nothing about it. That's the future. The future,
Exactly.
And social media now, influencers, they're tainting, what it means to be a kid, what it means to be a young teen, right? And they're showing
boys are in trouble, my friend.
Yeah, they're showing them these falsehoods that, my buddy Pete and I always talk about all the time. It's one of those things where they have these videos now where it's like about people committing suicide, and they're like, people will forget about you shortly, and it's like, why even have these videos? It makes no sense, right? And it just makes you feel even worse. And you see it now. We talked about it, the depression in kids, the anxiety, right? In the States, the second biggest stat for me that sits out for suicides is the age range is 11 to 14.
Mm-hmm.
Is number 2. Think of it, 11 to 14. At 10, 11, they're starting to get on the computer. That now it's tablets and everything else, and they're seeing everything, and it's like they're seeing this fake world, and then they're trying to emulate it and replicate it, and you're never going to, because it's not real life. Screen is not real life, right? So that brings me to the next question, right? You created humanity, right, to give men a safe space to be vulnerable, right? But let's be honest, getting men through that door is the hard part. How do you do it?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I do actually, and I appreciate, the use of the word vulnerable, and I'm a big fan of Brene Brown and all of the work that she's done around that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't use the word vulnerable.
Yeah.
So that's my first thing, is my invitation to men, for the most part, I'm going to be using language like open. If I'm going to be talking about that, I'm going to talk about open.
Okay.
One, the energy is actually the same, and I believe it's actually even more powerful, because here's the thing about vulnerability. If I'm being vulnerable with you, right, then I'm not in a position to receive anything you might send back. I'm vulnerable, right? I can't take anything in. I can't receive in that moment.
Receive anything, yeah.
And when I'm open, it's an opportunity for mutual flow, right? I can be open from a position of strength. It's hard to be vulnerable from a position of strength. And at any rate, even if it is possible to be vulnerable from a position of strength, in our brains, which is where men do most of their decision making from, we're going to block it out, right? Because vulnerability equals, weakness to a certain degree. We forget the fact that the guy who got the Purple Heart at one point was in a vulnerable position and came out of it. And that's why he's getting the Purple Heart. Right? Yeah. The guy who was never in danger of anything, they don't get the Purple Heart. Yeah. You did something heroic, right? So that part gets left out when we think of the word vulnerable when it comes to day-to-day life or feelings or emotions. So that's the first thing, as I start with openness. And I also tend to try to use language that can meet men where they're at. I'm not getting them to aspire to anything, right? So it's about being met first and foremost, right? I don't want you vulnerable. I want you open. I want you met, right? And then what I also want you to do is start to think about who's telling your story, right? Because the fact of the matter is, most of us have been fed a story most of our lives that we have had very little say in shaping and speaking about, right?
Yeah.
So I talk about society's toxic spells, right? And these are all the isms, by the way, fall into this category. All the isms, right? So capitalism is one of them. Capitalism as an idea is not a bad idea. We've just applied it really, really poorly so that it benefits a small group of people and makes everybody else basically cogs in the machine, right? And consumers of the products of our own machine creations, which is insane. We go and we slave over these machines and we do all of this work to go home and buy the things that we made. What? Like, that's insane. Like, that's like the farmer, raising corn, going into the house and then buying it off of his wife. Like,
so true.
It's insane. So capitalism is a spell, right? And it keeps us under these things. Racism is a spell. Sexism is a spell, because they're all nothing but words that have influenced and shaped our lives. And when we start to see through those things, men can actually start to tell a new story for themselves, right? Or they can at least start to undo the one that's been imposed upon them.
Yeah.
Right. And then we go in, and it's because it is, at the end of the day, it's about them. I want them to understand. I want them to reconnect with themselves. I want them to understand what it is that they have within themselves that has been there the whole time. I'm not teaching men nothing, right? I'm a mirror. At the end of the day, I'm going to show you what you couldn't see. Because I can't see my jaw right now. And I can, because there's a camera there, but I can't see my jaw, my cheeks, my ears, right? I can't see any of that. I need a mirror to do that. So what are the parts of yourself that you can't see? I'm going to invite men in front of a mirror. And sometimes you're not going to like what you're going to see, but over time, it'll start to mean something different.
Yeah. And you got to stop building that. You got to stop building that. You got to, I say it all the time. One of the things for me is every day. One of my biggest goals is to grow and learn every day. And if I'm not growing and learning every day, then I'm stuck in the mud and I'm spinning my wheels. I
tell you, if you're learning, it's painful, but it is so painful. I appreciate you saying that, because learning is the hardest thing we've ever got to do.
Yeah. For the longest time, Paul, I was not receptive, right? Communication-wise, receptive with, my ex-partners, my ex-wife, not receptive at all to receiving anything. And I say quite often, I could sit there and have watching TV or whatever it is and having a conversation. They would say to me, "You're not listening." And I could sit there and regurgitate it word from word right back to them, right? It was a learned behavior of mine of, okay, listening, boom, 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 okay, and then regurgitate it back, right? And that's one of the things I had to do, was unlearn those bad behaviors, unlearn those patterns, right? And it was one of the hardest things to have to look myself in the mirror, right? And stop pointing the finger at everybody else and pointing the finger at myself and saying, hey, what have you done? What are the problems that you have? What's your role in this issue?
Yeah.
Not what's their faults, what's my faults? What have I done wrong, right? But doing that inner work, right? And I tell people, I'm going to be healing the rest of my life. But when you start doing the work, right, it all starts with the mindset of work has to be done. You're not going to heal overnight, but you're also not going to heal without the work. People think you can do this and you can do that, right? I say it all the time. If you go to the doctors and they say, hey, you got high blood pressure, right? They give you a pill. Just because you have that pill doesn't mean your blood pressure is going down. You still have to do the work to make your blood pressure go down, right? It's simple like in life, right? If you want to learn and grow, you have to be open. You have to receive it.
Yeah.
And for my whole life, I was just totally closed off. And I knew everything. I was the smartest man in the room. And if I didn't know something, I'd make it up and pretend I knew it, right?
Sure.
And when people talked to me, I would not receive it. It would go in one ear and out the other. And I would sit there and then the conversation would be over, right? My biggest thing was, I don't want to argue. I don't want to fight, right? With my ex-girlfriend and ex-wife, right? And it wasn't that they didn't want to argue. They just wanted to have a conversation. And for me, my defense mechanism was, I don't want to fight. I don't want to argue. So we're not even going to talk about this. We're just going to end the conversation and it's over with. And you know what? Everything's great now. We're back to normal. Everything's great. No, I wasn't man enough to say, hey, you know what? I fucked up. Excuse my language, but I messed up, right? This is my role in it. So let's have that conversation, right? Let's have that healthy relationship conversation that we need to have to clear the air, right? I did something wrong. Okay, let's talk it out and, apologize. And I say it all the time. If somebody's truly sorry about something and they apologize once and they tell you it's not going to happen again and they come back and it happens again, there's no reason to be dealing with that person anymore. There's no reason to be talking to that person anymore, because if they were truly sorry, they would never do it again.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, yes, there's an and for me in most things. And so it's a yes and it's always for me. But I'm going to start with one of the things that's really missing for most men is other men.
Yeah,
and,
so true.
When it comes to these kinds of conversations in relationship, we we've developed this sort of weird structure in society where men go to their wives first with whatever problems they're going through, with whatever shit they're navigating. And that is a very, very new phenomenon to the human experience, right? Men used to gather in council and in circle all the time, as did the women, right? That's where they would go first.
Yeah.
And that's where I would be challenged, and that's where I would be confronted. And that's where any sharp edge that would have been, cutting and hurtful of what I might express to my partner would have been softened and challenged. Iron, what is it? Iron forges iron, whatever the thing is.
Iron forges steel, yeah.
Right? And like the whole idea is that when men challenge each other, right, it's what makes us sharp and clean when we come into contact with our partners. Not sharp to be able to hurt and cut, but clean and ready and steady, right? So men not having other men is one of the primary things that is missing right now for us. I had a men's circle, a beautiful 3-day circle in October with 12 men here in Montreal, not too far. And at the end of it, we were kind of going around and what was your biggest takeaway that everybody was sharing? And I just looked at everyone, and I was actually the oldest one in the room. And I was like, this is the only thing men must do in this time.
Yeah.
Be with other men. Men, I'm not one for must and have to and need to and all that. But the one thing I think men must do is spend time with other men. It's just, it's so necessary. And even if it doesn't have to be a men's weekend per se, just spend time with other men, not watching the hockey game and, drinking beers and stuff. Spend time in the company of other men. Talk with other men. Be present with other men, right? It's so critical. And then the other thing,
you got to find that community, right, Paul? You got to find that community where men, gather and they're able to talk to each other, because that's one of the hottest things I've found, right? With the community that I'm building, right? I started a segment I do on Mondays, Mental Health Mondays, which has been huge, right?
Beautiful.
And the feedback I get, from, coworkers, from family, from friends, right? That text me and they're like, hey, I appreciate that, podcast the other night, it really hit home, and I appreciate you, the courage to talk about it. And I go, hey, I'm just a man, right? Like anybody else. But if we talk about it, right, we can smash those stigmas. And if we have those conversations, we can break down those barriers that need to be broken down and show men that, hey, it's okay not to be okay, right?
Yeah.
You need to talk to somebody. You need to fix it. You need to get it right. And, not get it right in the sense of, oh, you need to be 100%. No, you just need to get your mind right. And it could be, right? People get so caught up in relationships and friendships and making money at work and trips and everything else, right? Instead of really slowing down and focusing on the present, staying in the moment, right? Living life in the moment, right? Of enjoying that beautiful sunset, enjoying that beautiful sunrise, right? I say it all the time, and enjoying that beautiful rainy day where you go out and you just look up and the rain hits you in your face and you're just so happy to be alive and peace and at peace, right? Where I could never experience that 10 months ago when I was going through everything and I was living life the wrong way. It was one of the hottest things for me. I had joy in nothing. Nothing brought me joy,
Yeah.
I won't say nothing. The one thing that I did have joy with was when I was behind the lens, because I do amateur photography, behind the lens, just out by myself, just taking pictures of nature and all that, right? But when I started going down the hole of my depression and isolating, one of the biggest things I stopped doing was taking that camera out.
Yeah.
And I should have known that the one thing that brings me joy, taking photos and doing all that, I'm not doing anymore. So there's something wrong here where I got to focus, and get to the root of the problem of what's causing me my issues, right? What's bringing me down every day?
Yeah.
It could have been certain people in my life, could have been the job, right?
Yeah.
But now with clarity, nothing can really get in my space. And, I talk it out if there's an issue, and I don't bring things home with me. And I'm at a point where I live my life for myself, and I live in the moment, and I live in the present moment. And hey, if you want to be my friend and in my life, go ahead. If you don't want to be, hey, that's okay too. I don't need validation from anybody. The only validation I need is from myself. That's it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And it's tough because I say it, right? 10 months ago, I found love. People say it to me. Who is she? What does she look like? Is she beautiful? And I said, no, you're looking at him. I found I love myself, right? And that's one of the most powerful things you can find in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because once you start loving yourself, you can love others differently.
100%. Without knowing, I'm also, so I think the process of loving, I mean, love is always shifting, right? So it's never like healing, which is a word that I don't actually use as well with men. I use a different, lexicon. I use the word holing, right? Because if you try to take men on a healing journey, they're going to think there's a destination that they're meant to arrive at. And that's a false, but it's the same thing with love, right? You don't get to this certain level and then stop doing the work of loving, right? If you're going to have a sustained love, it's got to be sustained over time. And it's the same thing with ourselves. And so that's the other thing for me, it's really important. Yes, start loving yourself. Absolutely. But you also don't have to wait until you've hit some sort of apex moment before you can also start to move towards loving other people, right? Because this is also something else. Oh, you can't love other people until you love yourself. I believe you can't love other people until you start to learn how to love yourself. The process of it is enough to start to learn to love others. And
to
just
love others, yeah.
Acknowledge that it's going to be messy along the way, but guess what? That's love.
Yeah, exactly.
Love is messy. So if we're honest with each other about where we are and about what we're experiencing and navigating, then we can move towards these places much sooner. And that's actually where love gets tested anyways, is in relationship with someone, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't know what you're going to be like in a relationship until you're in one.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you might be in a different one and then you'll be totally different. Like it's all about the relating. That's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big thing, right? So you founded, right, the Canoe in 2020 because you believe death belongs to the living, right? Unpack that for us. What does that mean? And why does it matter so much right now?
Yeah. So you've spoke about a few of these things, right? And you've used some of the language that points in the direction that actually, the dead belong with the dead, right?
Yeah.
Because we have language that puts them there. Lost, gone, past, and even though it sounds more beautiful, transitioned. All of these things mean not here, not now, never again, right? So that removes them from our experience. But then you also said something where you said, they're with me, right? These people are with me. And I mentioned about inheritance. So we have this tension between these two sort of polarities that exists. And for the most part, in most cultures around the world, right? The language around past, lost, gone, that was never something that was used. People died. That's what happened. And guess what? Those people more often than not, aimed a part of the present. In other words, I say this about my mom as an example. My mom is Christmas. My mom died in 2022, but she is Christmas. It's present tense stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't lose my mom and she's not gone. And I'm definitely not an orphan, right? I know my mom. I know who she is. I know what she represents and what she stands for. I know how generous she is. I know all of these things to be absolutely true. And they remain true by speaking of her, by claiming her as someone who is living and bringing her into this. I am actually acknowledging and honoring where I come from, was what it I am made of, and everyone else in that. And here's the kicker. That's one of the key pieces to giving me a sense of belonging. And here in the West, we really struggle with that. We're always searching for belonging. I talked about it in my journey, right? I was always trying to figure out, how do I belong? How do I belong? How do I belong? Well, one of the ways we do that is by claiming our dead, by making them ises and not wases, right? I don't know what your lineage is, but part of mine is in Wales and England and also parts of Europe. And when someone died, they were buried in the village. Their bodies were kept in the home or wherever you were living for 3 days or whatever the mourning period was. And then they were buried in the village, like right next to where everything was.
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, there's Grandma Mary, I wonder how she's doing today. Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And, in Hawaiian cultures, they keep their dead alive through song, where they've got songs that are just the names of their loved ones as a ways of keeping them alive. And we instead want to put them, in the rearview mirror, not realizing, in fact, that when you think about it, right? If I were to ask you to close your eyes and to imagine, one of those people you mentioned who had died, let's say you said your mom died as well. Is that right? Okay. So your mom died. So if I were to ask you to close your eyes and to like imagine your mom, picture your mom, you're going to picture her in front of you. That's where she's going to be. That's the default of the brain. So in fact, your mom, who is quote unquote your past, right? And I'm doing that in air quotes. When you imagine her, she's actually in front of you, not behind you, not past, not gone and not lost. You know exactly where she is, right? And it sounds silly, but we have to remember something. Our words matter. They are the things that shape our experience. And so when we say lost, when we say gone, when we say passed away, they shape our experience and it leaves us feeling like we don't belong.
Yeah.
So it's one of the ways we reclaim that, first and foremost.
Yeah. So when you just said that to me, right, obviously I got some chills, but I picture my mother at the kitchen stove cooking American chop suey, which is what we used to have, with a cigarette in her mouth, right? And she used to do it all the time. She'd have the cigarette hanging out, and I could picture it like she was right there, right in front of me. But I felt this overwhelming, like, through my body, like she was like giving me a hug, like, and I believe in my heart that they're still here, and you carry on, not for them, but with them.
Again, my mentor, Stephen Jenkinson, talks about the fact that we have a responsibility actually to the dead to carry them forward.
Yeah.
That is our responsibility. We have to remember that without them, we are not.
We are not. Yeah.
And if we cannot carry them as an act of simple gratitude for that, right? We're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And look at the state of things right now. And I'm not saying that this is the reason why things are the way they are, but it certainly plays a role. It plays an influence, right? Because again, there's so many ways for us to feel like we don't belong here. First and foremost, our ancestors didn't, necessarily come from here, most of us. So there's that. And then there's the fact that we come here and we're born in a home. And if you've got siblings, then maybe one's on the other side of the country and the other one's, 45 minutes away by car. So like, where's the family? Right. And then maybe, you're from a divorced family. And so now where's it? There's so many different layers to our sense of not belonging anymore. And it gets amplified by the way we engage with our dead. And we don't really even talk about them as our dead as such, right? Because again, some people are going to hear this and even feel uncomfortable that we're using the word so often, right? But my mom didn't pass away. My mom died.
Yeah.
And really that's all that happened is she died. It's the most natural thing. And that doesn't mean I'm not heartbroken, but a broken heart is how I know that I'm alive.
Yeah. And I know you said, right, the sense of belonging, right?
Yeah.
And I can say it, right, that Donald Trump, right, and I'm not getting political, but I'm just going to say this because this is what I truly believe, right? His voters and his base, right, he gave them this false hope of this false sense of belonging, right? You don't belong anywhere else, but you belong in this group, right? The MAGA group. He made people feel like they were part of something and was able to convincingly get 76 million people to believe that they were part of something, right? And to me, they were all just part of the con that he was running, right? I don't know your politics, but
It doesn't matter because the point is that you're making, which is so important, is that we're all so hungry to belong. It's actually it's what makes polarization, which has never been so rife as it is right now.
As it is right
now.
So
easy for people to create, right?
Yeah.
It is so easy for me to create a polarization sort of
And that's what I was going to say to you, right? That's the issue where people just want to belong, right? And he gave them that false hope of, hey, you belong here with us, right? And people ate it up. And so that's one of the things, right? I think as a society, right, we're all yearning for belonging, right? Whether we, but I find, right, that for me, when I started becoming my true authentic self, right, the sense of belonging, it doesn't matter to me anymore. I don't want to belong to anything. I just want to live my life, right? Find someone that I love, maybe spend the rest of my life with them, but also still doing the work in the community, still doing the work with my neighbors, still doing the work with my family, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think the one thing we lose is that in a sense of community, it's everyone's right and it's everyone's duty in a community to make sure we protect each other and make sure we lift each other up. Right. And I think we've lost that as in the West. And I'm not speaking for Canada. I'm just speaking for America. Right. I think I love America. I'm grateful. I love it. It's the greatest country in the world. It's the only country that I know. It's the country that I was born in, right? So I have this, allegiance to America because I was born here, right? And I look at it and I say, I'm grateful, but also struggle with the fact that we are such a selfish group of people. So many of us Americans, right? And self-righteous, and we belong here and we belong there. And, there's so many things that frustrate me when it comes to America because it's one of those where I think we all just need to be grateful that we come from a great country where we can come in and we can put the lights on. We have running hot water. We have food on the table. We have shelter, right? There's some people in this world that don't have shelter. There's some people that are going to bed that haven't had a meal in 3 days. There's some people that are walking the streets in 100-degree weather with no shoes, right? There's kids, that haven't eaten in 4 days. And we're pissed off because the store didn't have Snickers. They ran out of Snickers. Really? Are we that are we that selfish? Yeah. Again, I think that's not something that's new. I think the West, especially in America, we turned a blind eye to the struggle everywhere else, right? And I'm a firm believer, right, of nation building, which is what America prides themselves on, right? Nation building. But I believe that America's lost its way when they talk about nation building, because for me, nation building starts at home, right? Mm-hmm. We have veterans, we have kids going to bed hungry. And if we're nation building around the world, but our nation isn't built, and still being built up, how are we or who are we to say, you got to build this, you got to build that? We shouldn't have a right to do that, right? And I don't, politics aside, right? There's so much going on in the world that people focus on. And one of the things I've learned, right? You have the war in Iran going on right now, the war in Russia and Ukraine, right? Those are things I can't control, right? I have no say in any of that. Does it hurt me that there's millions of people killed in the Russia-Ukraine war? No doubt about it. Those are 1 million people that should still be here on this earth. But for me, and for your work, right? And I'm going to ask you this: what does a death doula actually do in the room? And what do you carry in and what do you leave behind?
That's a great question. I'll just want to say one little thing, and I'll answer your question, but I want to say one thing about belonging. And I think the last thing I want to say on belonging is the belonging that most people are seeking right now is that somebody else says they belong. Yeah. They want to have that validated by somebody else. And what you described for yourself was an inner sense of belonging, right? And that's what's missing. That's the belonging that drives so much depression and dis-ease and all of these things, about it. Right? Yeah. It's waiting for somebody to tell me I belong.
So, I did that for so long, Paul, where my depression was just, I was waiting for validation at every corner, every turn I was waiting for validation, right? If I held the door, right, my validation was looking for the person to tell me thank you.
Yeah.
And I was looking for validation everywhere, every corner I turned, right? And then when you get rid of that, right, and you know that no longer needing that validation from anyone but yourself, it is a great feeling, right? But it also comes along with it is, I say it for, when I went through it, now I'm on this healing journey, right? This is something that I'll be healing for a while. But I still do the work every day. I grab the journal, I write in it, whether it's, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, but I do make sure my big days on Saturdays that I write in the journal for 30 minutes. Right? And I tell people, for me, my greatest therapy is when I'm able just to sit alone and write, because it goes from my mind to the pen to paper, right? And it's almost like a release valve, right? Of when it's coming and flowing out and getting it out, right? But I still talk to my professional, therapist, and I still go through all of that, right? But there's ways that we can do it, right? So again, back to the question, right?
Yeah.
What does a death doula actually do? And what do you bring in the room, carry in, and what do you leave behind?
So a death doula can show up in the world in a number of different ways. And a lot of people will have probably heard of a birth doula, right? So doula means to accompany, is the accompanier, right? So a birth doula accompanies a woman and the family on the birth journey. And I do it on the other side of the spectrum. So in some cases, I'll be with the family when somebody has received a terminal diagnosis or when they're aging and it's clear that they're on their, towards the edge of life, and I'll support that person, but also the family in preparing for that. Because again, we don't we actually don't have a lot of exposure to this. And so we don't have an opportunity to learn what it's like to be present with dying and to navigate those moments. So I'm there to help and support them on that part of the journey. I'll also, obviously, once the person has died, or maybe for the first time, they'll come into contact with me because someone has died. And that's when they're going to reach out. And I'll accompany them in really reshaping and reframing the relationship to grief. Because as I said, for me, grief is not a process to overcome. It's not 5 phases to go through. It's not something that you're actually, but with me anyways, we're going to make of your grief something that nourishes and feeds you and lifts you up through your life. That's my way of being. And it's very different from what you will get from a grief counselor and from a lot of other professionals. And I believe that it's far more sustainable as a result. So those are 2 ways. Then I also do, and this is not every death doula that will do that. Most doulas will do the first 2 things that I just spoke of. And then I can also do things, of course, like a celebration of life, and also planning for some of the different things that might be done once someone has died, and memorials and things. The second piece I do is what we're doing right now, because as I joked earlier, I believe that grief and death have really bad PR and marketing companies working for them, and they're grossly misunderstood. I talked about grief as being this thing that's flattened and hardened and, silenced. And really, we don't give it a lot of space. People are asked to hurry up and get back to living, right? Like,
Yeah.
we'll give you
Get
3
back to
days
work.
off work. We'll give you 3 days off work. You've got 2 weeks of like me having to deal with it in the living room, but then I don't want to see it anymore.
Yeah.
And death is somewhat similar, in the sense that we want to defeat death. There's a movement right now being led by this gentleman, Brian Johnson, called Don't Die, right? And it's this is literally their tagline. It's a global movement of people committed to living to living forever. And this is the best part coming up, because we have stuff to do. Like, that is the height of hubris, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is your reason for wanting to live forever. But we forget something so fundamental, that the moment that death stops, life ends. Because life needs death. Life, from a very practical point of view, anybody who ate anything today and killed something today, something had to die, right? Whether you're a vegetarian, a vegan, a pescatarian, or an old school Western, steak and potatoes person, something lost its way of being in order to sustain your life into the next moment, right? So death is necessary. But then on top of that, if people don't die, new life isn't possible, because we just don't have the resources. We don't have the space. It just doesn't work. The math doesn't work.
The math's not math.
The math's not math anymore. And if we did, and this is something that I think most people have heard a version of, right? But part of what makes life so beautiful and so worthy of our presence and attention is the fact that it ends. If it went on forever, man, we would get bored really quick. Like,
real quick.
I have a friend, and she was like, I want to live to be 150. And, she started sending me these kinds of things. And I'm like, you go if that's what you want. Me?
That's your
I'm
goal.
not interested. That's way too much retirement time, right? Like, that's way too much retirement time. And I want to make space for people.
Now, Paul, right? How many times have you been in the room, when someone's passed?
I don't really keep track, but I've, it's close to between 50 and 75 people. Because to be in the room when someone dies is a very unique moment, right? So actually in the room when they die is even less than that, because that's
their last breath.
That's a moment for family. That's a moment for intimacy with loved ones, right? But I've been with people right up until the edge of that life many, many times.
You ever been in a room with you ever been in a room where someone's dying with like 30 to 40 people in it?
Not that many. Most of the time it's quite small. Most of the time it's been quite small.
When my father passed, there was 30 to 40 people in the room.
Wow.
And
that's what it was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was, a lot of, my dad was a powerful union boss here in Boston, and he had a lot of, respect, and people loved him. And, in the end, he came home and he wasn't able to, there was a lot of people that weren't able to see him. So throughout the week that he was home before he died, everyone was coming by. And, it was funny. At one point in time, we had a line outside of, like 5 people waiting to come in and talk to him because they wanted some alone time with him. I say it, the mayor of Boston was one of them. He had to wait outside for a bit. He ended up becoming the Secretary of Labor under the Biden administration, right? A powerful guy, Buddy Walsh. And, he's out there waiting. When we had people waiting and when my dad died, I'll never forget, there was 30 to 40 of us and we saw him take his last breath. One of my old neighbors was there and we all got around and we all held hands, the group, and we said a Hail Mary, and it was powerful because my dad, right? And one of the things I struggled with for a while, Paul, was my dad was one of the most strongest guys I ever knew, right? Never showed weakness. And in that final moment, right, here he is at his weakest point, but still nobody saw him weak. They just seen that, because to me, the strong thing for me was him being able to just let go and let life go with all these people watching him, right? And he was showing them, hey, you got to accept it, right? It's okay, but the fight's over, the struggle's over, right? Because he died of cancer and he was struggling and fighting. But in that room was one of the most powerful memories I have of what, for me, unconditional love looks like, what support looks like, what family looks like, what community looks like, because everybody was there when it happened, right? And to witness that, it was one of the strongest things. Paul, I learned much longer after. Still to this day, I'm hearing stories of my old man, of things he used to do and how he used to help the workers and help the families. And still people will come up to me and, 16 years later, still mentioning my dad's name. And that's the not hard part, but the crazy part for me is because usually when someone passes, it's like 6 months to a year and then nobody talks about them anymore and they forget about them, right? And it's my dad, and people are still talking 16 years later about, oh, your dad was this, or your dad was a giant, right? Your dad was the voice, right? And it's just powerful to hear that people still think about him after he's been gone from the earth 16 years later, right? That's the powerful thing of who he was, right? And still, they're still talking about him, carrying him with them,
That's right. It's beautiful. And I mean, to witness the last breath. I mean, and I use that word witness intentionally because, there's, in the end of the day, if you were to look at them, the difference between a witness and a spectator, when you're looking at them, is not, there's no difference, right?
Yeah.
But the energy of it is spectator means you watch, you turn your head, you move away, and it's done. But witness is a responsibility, right? And to carry that responsibility of witnessing someone's last breath it's a beautiful, beautiful burden to be asked to carry, right? And 30 people carrying that beautiful responsibility out into the world. I mean, that is a rare thing these days. Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful. One of the reasons we fear death. Yeah.
I still think about it and I'm just like, I'm
imagining it and
it was powerful,
Beautiful.
And the lady that led the prayer, right, was our old neighbor who had a swimming pool, right? We grew up next to her too. And she was the most gracious lady. Eileen O'Sullivan is her name. And we would always come over and can we swim today? Is your mom coming over? No, mom said it's okay. You're going to watch us for a bit. And she would watch us and she was always grateful and gracious. And she was one of the best ladies I ever met. And it was like a fitting tribute because my mom and dad and the, O'Sullivans were close. And for her to lead that prayer, right? For her to come in and everybody was still shocked and, it was still a little bit lost. And she came in, took charge, right? Said the prayer. It's one of those things I'll never forget, right? Just a powerful moment of, again, community, right? Not just family, but community in the sense of, hey, my father truly was, somebody that was loved, that was cared for. And again, 16 years later, they're still talking about him. It's powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
Thank
you for sharing that.
So I know you've worked, right, with the UN Refugee Agency, right? You've pushed for justice in your own community. You've built ecosystems for communities. What's the through line in all of that for you?
Well, again, I'm going to come back to that word of service, right? And you said something about, giving a voice to those who might not be heard otherwise, right? And your platform is a great example of that here. I think that's, for me, when I look at my time with the UN and the High Commission for Refugees, refugees, they're not, everybody or a lot of people conflate refugees and immigrants, right? And there's a very, very obvious difference between the two, whereby refugees flee largely, right? And so many of them never go back. But they also come with this deep, deep sense of resolve. There was actually a research study that was done here in Canada by Deloitte, a massive, and, there's a lot of perception that these people come into the countries and they, kind of suck the social system dry. Well, it was really interesting because what they learned, and I'll focus, primarily here on Quebec, a refugee who comes into the country and enters the social services system is typically in there for 5 to 7 years before they're able to lift themselves up. On the other hand, someone who was born here, a Quebecer or a Canadian who was born here and goes in, on average is in there for 11 to 13 years.
13 years.
Right? And yet we have this perception that it's the refugee or the immigrant,
that they're the issue. They're the problem.
That they're the issue and that they're the ones that are, if they're getting a job, they're taking a job that nobody wants almost all the time. You've got doctors, who are janitors. And so for me, working with the High Commission for Refugees was really an opportunity to bring a voice. And, the country that I cared about most in my work was Yemen, which is the world's, still to this day, greatest crisis. And you can't rub two nickels together to support the Yemeni people. And I'm heartbroken that Russia and Ukraine went to war, of course, and that Ukrainians had to flee. But we were raising hundreds of thousands of dollars a day just here in Canada for Ukraine, right? And so the Ukrainian people were actually being heard while the Yemenis were not, and their crisis is much. And that's, so that was for me, a major cause. But through them all, to answer your question more directly, it comes back to that word service, right?
Service, yeah.
So High Commission for Refugees, Canada's largest food bank is here in Montreal. And I was leading their team for a couple of years there, working with health groups and things like that. So those things are always and here again, people who are grieving, men who are feeling isolated, they are men and people who have no voice, right? And I know how privileged the journey has been for most men throughout history in comparison to other communities. But justice isn't about swinging the ball from one complete extreme to the other. That's not it. And if we really say we are who we say we are, then we have to figure out how to hold everybody. That's just how it works. Because it's a bad analogy, I've been shown, okay, but I'm going to use it anyways because I think it still works a little bit. So I have 3 girls, as we said, and actually 2 of my girls are from my ex-wife's previous marriage. So they're actually Japanese. Their father biologically was Japanese as well. And so they're full-on Japanese. So I have 3 girls, and 2 of those girls are, from another culture, and it's clear. So I'm all for women's programs. I'm all for programs that support Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I'm all for LGBTQ+. And getting those programs into workplaces and communities, they're absolutely necessary, and I will continue to support their growth forever. And let us remember that for the most part, we are giving these people those programs. We are helping to support them and strengthen them because of the ways that men largely have been showing up.
Yeah.
And if we don't start creating places and ways of supporting men and the grief that they're holding and the grief that's tearing at them inside, it's the equivalent of giving all of these other communities buckets to bail out the boat without ever actually looking at the fact that there are holes in the boat. And, we need to plug those holes. We need those men to get the support so that they stop taking on stop flooding the boat with water and creating such havoc. So again, it's an imperfect metaphor, but I think people will get the sense of what it is that I'm talking about, that when we support men, we protect our women and girls.
Yeah. Paul, 2 more questions before we end, right? You said something that stopped me cold, right? We all change the world. The question is whether we do it with intention or not. When did you first know that was true?
That was one of if there's any philosophy that came out of me at any time, that was the first one. I think I was 22, 23 years old. It was a long time ago. And somebody asked me as I was going through a job interview about, how, if you could change the world, how would you do it? And I literally said, I was born.
Yeah.
I already have. So your very presence has changed the world, right? Your very presence has changed the world. it would be different if you weren't here. So you're born. You've changed the world. We think that to mean that I have to change all of the world. No, right? The world as a whole is different because you are here. Now the question is what are you going to do with it? Right? So we can do the Netflix and the Amazon one-click shopping and the, Uber Eats and just doing all of those things and staying in our rooms. We can do that. We don't need to change anything, right? But we need to understand that that's the life we're going to create. But we can also choose something different. And with intention, your being here will change it in a direction that you actually have a say in.
And so true, right? And so if you could say one thing, right, to a man sitting alone right now, struggling and convinced that no one would understand, what would you say to him?
Two things. One, no story is ever entirely unique. No story is ever, and this is the part, everybody's story is unique, but to say that it is entirely unique is not the same. So whatever it is that you're going through, there are other men who have experienced parts of it in their own way. So no story is ever entirely unique. And that's really important because we have this unicorn philosophy in the world, right? Like everybody's a unicorn. Everybody's unique. It's not actually true, right? We have flavors of each other that we can, right? That we have a sense of. If you tell me that you had a hot dog today, I have a sense of what that is. I don't have to actually sit there and eat your hot dog with you to know what it tastes like, right? And that's the same for life's experiences. I'm going to have a sense of it, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing I'm going to invite through, and this is really actually something that I think is true for most people, but for men in particular, nothing that you were told, nothing you were ever told was ever meant to actually define you. It was only ever meant to control you.
Yeah, so true.
Right? And it's really important. We forget that. We think we are defined by other people and we're not.
No, not at all. So Paul, I just want to say, right, if you guys want to find Paul, you can find him at his personal site, www.paulsimard.co, The Canoe at www.thecanoe.co, humanity.co. On Instagram, you can find him at living__wisdom, LinkedIn, Paul Simard, The Canoe, and then Facebook, paul.sim17. And if you're a man sitting with something heavy right now, reach out to Paul directly. He's offering free exploratory sessions for people ready to begin the journey. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. And Paul, I want to say something and I want to say it slowly because I think it deserves to land. We live in a world that is very good at rushing past grief, rushing past pain, rushing men out of their feelings and families away from their dying. We've built entire systems, cultural, medical, social, designed to make the hottest parts of being human fast and invisible. And then there's you, standing there, unhurried, saying, no, we're going to sit with this. We're going to feel this. We're going to see each other. That is radical. That is brave. And honestly, that is the most loving thing a person can do. You've reminded me today that grief isn't the enemy. Disconnection is. That men aren't broken. They're just unheard. That death isn't the opposite of life. It's woven right through the middle of it, giving everything else its meaning. Thank you for the work you do in the dark, for the families you've held, for the men you've welcomed home to themselves, for building canoes when everyone else was building walls. The world needs more people willing to go where it's hard, and you, Paul, have been going there on purpose for a long time. We see you, brother. We love you, and we appreciate you. Thank you for joining the podcast today.
Amen.